right now. There we go. So what does breathwork and meditation have to do with gender equality? Kind of generally speaking, not necessarily a whole lot on the surface, but I think it's helpful to think of it in terms of the way that activism and advocacy for global and social justice works to spark these attitudinal and behavioral changes. So the ways in which we think about ourselves in relation to the world around us and the ways in which we actively interact with it. So activism and advocacy is almost always, particularly in like popular culture stuff, associated with those really out there actions, right? The marching, the protesting, demanding positive change. These are all such important things, but it's really only part of the work that we need to be doing as activists and advocates. So practices like breathwork and meditation help us to slow down and create space in our minds, in our bodies, to do the kind of less exciting or less showy work of personal activism and advocacy. It allows us to consciously cultivate compassion and empathy as essential skills that will help us to really consider and be receptive to our own and others' attitudes about issues like gender equality. Are we truly accepting of women stepping into leadership roles? Are we really open to the nurturing abilities of men? I think that this is the space where we really start to create lasting and truly impactful change. So I'm going to pass it over now to Brian in just a moment. And he'll be doing us the honor of sharing his own experience and perspective of the overlap, right, between meditation and gender equality. But I would love for you as well as our participants, as our audience here, to think about why, for you, could a mindfulness practice like breath-focused meditation be a useful tool for gender equality? We'll come back to this, maybe have a little chat about it at the end of the session, but for now, just kind of keep it in the back of your mind. Maybe the experience of it will kind of bring some of your thoughts into clearer focus. Okay, so I am absolutely delighted to introduce you to Brian Malone. Brian is a yoga and meditation teacher based in Dublin. His classes focus on creating both body and breath awareness as a way to help us manage our moment-to-moment experience in a way that hopefully allows us to live with more clarity, confidence, and peace. So over to you now, Brian.
Okay, cool. So listen, good evening, guys. Yeah, I am Brian. Some of you guys I might know already, but if not, it's nice to meet you guys now. And first of all, thank you to Ashlyn and all of the organization here for inviting me to speak. It's it's an honor, and the lovely thing about things like this, I guess, for someone like me, I guess, to partake in it is it always offers me an opportunity to reflect on my own experience. It gives me an opportunity, I guess, to frame it in ways that can be useful to me first and foremost, and then hopefully might be useful to other people as well. So what I kind of wanted to start with would just be to, I guess, talk a little bit about how practices like yoga and breathwork have impacted me first and foremost, I guess, in relation to what the topic you guys are looking at over the last little while, at me as a man, I guess. And it's kind of like a nice coincidence with this, because yesterday was my birthday and I turned 33, and it's actually 10 years since I first started doing yoga. I was 23 years old when I first went into a yoga class. So I have like a decade of these practices behind me now, which makes me feel old, but I've actually really enjoyed getting older, so that's not really a problem for me. But I guess for me, what I always when I talk about these kind of things, so me personally, like I would consider myself an incredibly average person in a lot of ways. And like I kind of like, or maybe average is not the right word, but very kind of like unremarkable person. So I came from like a really loving, supportive family with amazing parents and two like incredible sisters. Like financially, we were always comfortable without ever being like, you know, spectacularly wealthy or anything like that. But I never like worried. When it came to things like that, I went to good schools. I had amazing friends. I loved football, and I was like okay at football. Again, I wasn't like spectacularly good, but I was like okay. So I got a lot of enjoyment out of that. So I went to a nice college. I studied something that I was interested in. So there was like all of these things like in my life were just like really, really nice. And like I said, kind of quite unremarkable. And despite that, I would have gone through periods of being like really quite sad. And I would have gone through, I experienced panic attacks, and I would have struggled quite a lot with my temper. That was one of like definitely my big issues growing up, and something which I think is quite common with all people, but particularly around men, you know, an inability to express themselves in a mindful way, I guess, to the extent that we kind of just explode sometimes. So like I said, despite living a life of pretty like, you know, comfortable, I would say, that I still kind of like suffered with these things. And so the interesting thing with like practices that originated particularly around India, so things like yoga, but also within Buddhism, is that these practices sort of take for granted, or take as their starting point that life is really difficult and that life is characterized by suffering. And that if we don't learn how to manage suffering and potentially get to the root of that suffering, we're kind of doomed to continuously suffer. And you know, the Buddha himself, I'm sure a lot of you guys might know his life story, but he was apparently born into like amazing wealth and comfort, the son of a prince, and you know, he still suffered. So yeah, these practices at their heart, although sometimes they can be looked at as, you know, some people might look at their yoga practice or their breathwork practice as like a break from their everyday life. You know, like a moment where you're able to just like switch off, and then, you know, you just go back to the normal mode of being, let's say. And these practices were really intended, at least originally, to transform how you relate to both yourself and to others. And Ashley kind of touched on that a little bit before, that, you know, essentially all experience is relational experience. We're always relating to something, and how we manage those relationships will go a long way to how we experience our life, basically. So I kind of wanted to keep it, you know, these are topics that we could probably talk about for weeks if we had the time and the energy to do so. But so I wanted to try to keep it like brief-ish, but to mention, I guess, again, for me, sort of as a man, the biggest benefits that I gain from doing things like meditation and breath work, and kind of like the first thing, I think this can be quite common. I'm not sure, so I'm not sure how many like dudes we have here and right now, or you know, might be watching it later, but you know, I think it can be quite common for a lot of men is to be quite disconnected from our physical bodies, or if not disconnected from our physical bodies, to kind of look at our bodies as something that need to be like trained and worked, and you know, basically just to transport our heads around, or stuff like that. So you know, for me, for a lot of my life, my body was something that I used to play football, and that was it. I had no other major purpose for me other than just it allowed me to play football. And when we come to practices like yoga, for example, and there's lots of different ways you can practice yoga, lots of different styles, but one of the most common things we get encouraged to in a practice is actually to relate to your body in a kinder way, and to relate to your body as something that deserves to be looked after. And why this became such a big thing for me is that emotions like anger, let's say, although we often, you know, experience them through our thoughts, let's say, you know, used to be kind of a thought or a situation makes us angry, but emotions like anger begin first in your body. Like the way that we work is that feeling comes first and thinking comes second. So learning how to become more embodied, more sort of, I guess, at home within my body, And learning that my body was something that I could manage in a more mindful way, for me was huge. So I'm kind of lucky enough to say now that I haven't lost my temper in quite a long time. And that's not because I'm not in situations where I maybe would lose my temper. It's just that now I can sort of catch the beginning of that happening much earlier. I don't know if any of you guys have experience with like losing your temper. I'm sure we all do to a certain extent. But for me, when I would lose my temper, it was almost like I would just temporarily become a different person. And then afterwards, I'd look back on it and be like, what the fuck happened there? Whereas now, luckily, I'm sort of able to feel the beginnings of what might be me losing my temper, because I've just become much more aware at home in my body, I would say. And also just learning simple little things that like we can do with our body, let's say, whether it's just relaxing your shoulders, relaxing your hands, or a big thing is like relaxing your breathing, that can just help you sort of step back, I guess, from the immediacy of emotion. And another big thing for me that I've learned is not that emotion is bad or wrong, or that like anger is bad and being happy is really, really good, or, you know, being sad is really bad. And, you know, it's, for me at least, it's not an amazing thing to sort of like create hierarchies within our emotions, to kind of understand that all emotions are valid, but also that emotions can be managed. Because I think for me, for a long time, I always felt that like life was happening to me and not really understanding how I could actually participate in my experience, in a slightly more mindful way. So first and foremost for me, that was like the biggest thing, is just becoming more at home in my physical body. And the other thing that I think these practices have made the biggest impact on me, I guess, which I kind of just touched on there, is creating a sense of like responsibility. So within a lot of these practices, behind the philosophy behind them is that perception, so how we see the world, is not necessarily passive, it's actually creative, in the sense that how we look at the world shapes how we see the world. And so a lot of our ideas, I guess, we can like download from our upbringing, from our culture. You know, a lot of the ideas I think we can have about the world don't necessarily originate from us, but the let's say meditation, for example, the basic idea of meditation for me at its simplest form is a practice of listening. It's sort of intentionally listening to your own experience. And what for me comes out of that is, again, a sort of a sense of responsibility. And responsibility doesn't necessarily mean blame, but responsibility, I guess another way you can define responsibility is your ability to respond. So how you are experiencing what is going on around you, how are you able to respond to that experience? Again, in a slightly more mindful way, or in a way that's able to direct things in a more beneficial direction, I guess. And part of what behind this for me is, you know, okay, well, breathing. How does breathing make you think about like responsibility? You're breathing anyways. You don't have to be responsible for your breathing. Your body will look after that for you. But I guess the basic idea behind breath work is that how you're breathing and how you're feeling are always inextricably linked. So when you're feeling a certain way, that then gets reciprocated within your breathing. But equally, you could be breathing a certain way, and that can begin to influence how you feel. And the amazing thing about your breathing is that you don't have to think about it, but you can. And through thinking about it, you can change it if that's going to be a good thing for you to do. So again, there's this sort of like underlying sense of responsibility that you are always in some shape or form creating your experience, and that we can learn things, I guess, that help us frame or direct that experience in a slightly more beneficial way. So for me, I guess, again, as a man, one of the biggest things that these practices taught me was the skill of listening, and I kind of, I guess, intentional listening to my own experience. So again, whether that's just recognizing when I'm getting frustrated or when I'm getting angry, and being able to reflect on that in a slightly more mindful way. And I think the natural knock-on effect of becoming better at listening to your own experience is that you become better at listening to other people's experiences as well. And I feel that when it comes to things like gender equality, the most important job for men at this moment in time, in my opinion at least, is actually to listen. That like so much gets talked about, like men's work and men's responsibility and reclaiming masculinity, and I'm definitely not knocking any of that. I think it's all incredibly important, but I also think the most important thing for men to do at the moment is just shut the fuck up and actually listen to what is being said by women, and obviously not just women, but for people who are promoting this kind of like gender equality, to actually be able to step back and listen to that without projecting our own sort of perceptions onto it. We recently went through with my partner, we had like a baby during COVID, and that was amazing, but it also introduced me to a lot of the issues around like maternity care, and how maternity care was handled during like COVID and stuff like that, and even like aftercare and all of these little things. And again, one of the things that really that opened my eyes to was the importance of promoting and listening to women-led solutions to these things, and not just like men talking about what they think should happen in these situations. And so yoga, meditation, breath work as a way to teach us how to listen, I think is an incredible thing. And for me, that's probably like one of the most important parts of my practice, just becoming a better listener, again, internally, but also externally. And then I guess if I was to think of why these things might be useful for like women at the moment. So this is something that's kind of been going through my head a little bit, is that I sort of feel one of the biggest benefits we can get from breathwork, meditation, yoga in the modern world is that they help us down regulate. So down regulate, basically like calming ourselves down. And I feel for me, what I do, one of my most important jobs is to help people find a little bit more calm. But what's been running through my head is that there's so much in the world like to not be calm about, whether it's like gender inequality or the environment, or like World War III, which could potentially happen. Like there's so much in the world that's like, deserves attention and activity and stuff like that. And kind of as Ashton was saying before, like the kind of the very obvious activism. But so why would we be calm when there's so much to like not be calm about? But what we sometimes maybe forget a little bit is that we tend to actually make our best decisions. We tend to make our most creative decisions. We tend to make our most mindful decisions when we are calm. So that's why even in times of like demand, let's say, the importance of, even if it's just for like 15, 20 minutes at the end of the day, being able to find time to down regulate. Sometimes we can think of like resting or relaxing or calming down as almost like inactive, but actually these things are, or sorry, inactive and unproductive, but these things are actually incredibly productive. Because things like activism, stuff like that can be incredibly draining. And so you need to be able to like, it's a bit of a cliche, but this idea, you need to be able to like fill your cup. So yeah, the little practice that I'm going to take you through now, which hopefully will be kind of like nice for you guys, but I'm just going to bring you through sort of like a body scan meditation with a little focus on our breathing as well. Where again, the intention is going to be to like down regulate, I guess. The intention will also be on creating this little bit of internal listening. But yeah, I guess I would encourage you guys to think of this practice as yeah, a really productive thing to do, really productive, relaxing. So if it's cool, I'll bring you guys through it now. It's going to be like, kind of like a short and simple thing, but it's going to be nicest to take this lying down if that is possible. You can definitely do it seated as well, but ideally you'll lie down. So you could lie down on a couch, you could lie down on the floor, you could lie down in the bed. It's really not overly important where you're lying down. And like I said, seated is completely fine too. If lying down is just not an option for whatever reason, you can be seated and that is perfect as well. But if you are lying down, what I'd recommend is that you just try your best to be as comfortable as you can be. So that might mean throwing like a blanket over your body. That might mean placing a pillow behind your head. It might mean placing a little something underneath your knees, have socks on, have a cozy jumper on. You might even find it nice to put on a little something over your eyes if you want to like just make the room a bit dimmer that you're in, or turn down the lights, whatever it is. You guys know how to be comfortable. You don't necessarily need me to tell you. But yeah, comfort is our kind of objective. And same thing if you're seated, you know what I mean? Just make sure there's something kind of comfortable near your bum. Make sure you feel like cozy, I guess. And yeah, as you settle in here, feel free to move a little if you want to. So it's not going to be like a movement practice, but it's equally not going to be a stillness practice. So, we don't have to find any sort of like perfect still position. So it might be nice to move your fingers and toes a little bit as you settle in. It might be nice to roll your ankles and wrists a little bit as you settle in. It might be nice to nod your head or move your shoulders. And as you go through this practice, all of these movements are always welcome anytime that they might be useful. But you can kind of take just the next moment or two, no big rush here, just to let yourself settle into like a little bit of steadiness. And so steadiness, so it definitely doesn't have to mean stillness necessarily, but maybe just starting to let the kind of bigger movements gradually subside. And so the first thing that I'm going to recommend that you guys do is maybe allow your eyes to close. Now, having your eyes open is completely fine as well. But if it's comfortable, it can be nice just to let them close down, sort of give the eyes a little bit of a rest. And I actually want you guys to begin here is to first of all take a moment to bring your attention to any sound you can hear around you. So this could be sound that comes from inside the room that you're in. Depending on where you are, you might pick up sound from outside of the room that you're in. But what I encourage you guys to try and do here is to not like specifically search for something to listen to. But instead, could you almost think of letting your attention relax? As if you're just letting sound in. So not really extending your attention outwards to find sound. Just whatever sound there is, you're just letting that sound in. And I want you to take a moment and bring your attention to the sensation wherever air meets your skin. Maybe kind of tricky, but see if you can resist labeling that sensation with words. So whether it's hot, cold, warm, somewhere in between, try to just feel the sensation rather than labeling. And then maybe notice the sense of contact between your body and whatever is supporting it. So the ground, bed, chair, couch, whatever it is, just whatever points your body are supported. And as best you can, let yourself really release into that support. So sometimes even if we're lying down, we can almost unconsciously tense against that support. Try to let whatever is underneath you completely receive your weight. And I want you to bring your attention to your vision. Now, even if your eyes are closed, what I want you to imagine for a moment is that you're looking at a picture. And what I'm going to encourage you to explore is, rather than looking at that picture in portrait, so where your vision is kind of narrow and long top to bottom, imagine looking at that picture in landscape. As if you're like looking out at a horizon. So almost think of letting like the corner of your eyes widen. Almost think of letting the skin of your temples release back to your ears. And try to let your forehead even get a little bit wider. As if you're just letting a little bit of extra space come in between your eyebrows. And then I want you to take a moment to notice the position of your tongue. So when your tongue is at rest, so it's not in use, it's actually designed to rest upwards. See if you can let your tongue not like drop down in your mouth, but actually try to let your tongue rest upwards. Sometimes feels a little unusual, but it can also help with just slightly releasing the jaw. So maybe letting the teeth just slightly part. Again, this is subtle, but also see if you can let your inner cheeks sort of widen away from each other. So you're trying to like make your mouth a little bit more spacious. And I want you to bring your attention down towards your collarbones. Kind of very similar to how we just did around the face. Maybe think of letting your collarbones just get a little bit wider. Almost think of gravity just slightly drawing or hugging the shoulders towards the ground. As if that action of releasing the shoulders is just creating a little bit more space across the chest. And then maybe take a moment to bring your attention towards your upper arms. So the biceps, the triceps. And if it's comfortable, I want you to think of letting your outer arms just sort of roll a little back in space. You can almost use gravity just to gently open the area around your armpits. For a moment, bring your attention towards the muscles around the elbows. So where the lower upper arm, where the upper lower arm sort of come together to meet. Maybe see again, if you can just let that area slightly soften. And imagine just the elbows kind of opening out a little bit. Particularly if you're lying down. Really try to let gravity hug the weight of your arms down into the ground. And maybe bring your attention down into the palms of your hands. and even a little into the fingers. And our hands, one of the primary ways that we interact with the world. So what I want you to do for a moment is just make your hands into little fists and then spread the fingers out wide. And just do this a few times. Gentle fists, spread the hands wide. Gentle fists, spread the hands wide. And when you feel ready, just try to let your hands rest into what feels like halfway between those two positions. The hands aren't super closed, they're not super open, they're kind of just relaxed. And maybe let your attention come down towards your upper legs. So the muscles of the thighs, the hamstrings. And so your legs don't have to be in any particular position. But almost again, like we did with the arms, maybe think of letting the outer legs slightly roll out towards the ground. See if you can imagine creating a little bit of extra space in the inner legs. Allow the muscles around the knees to relax. And let your legs feel heavy. And particularly if we're lying down, don't feel any obligation to support that weight. Feel free just to let the legs go. And maybe let your attention come down towards the soles of the feet. Maybe the area around the toes. Maybe same as we did with the hands, just think of slightly crunching the feet in. So if you're trying to make your feet into a little fist, and then just think of spreading the feet out wide. And just repeating that a few times, and closing and opening. And when you feel ready, and just letting the feet relax into somewhere that's kind of in between. And again, almost imagine gravity just gently hugging the feet down into the ground. And when you feel ready, I want you to bring your attention to your breathing. And what I want you to do for a moment is maybe just notice where you're feeling your breath. So when you breathe, your body moves. And where you may be feeling that movement, is it the belly? Is it the chest? Are you more aware of your breath around your nose or around your mouth? The sides of the body, the back of the body? There's no right answers here. You're just paying attention to whatever it is for you. But then I also want you to think here, or what I maybe want you to notice, is how just like listening, you can actively breathe, and you can actively look for something to listen to, but you can also let your attention soften. You can kind of just let breathing happen. Now, again, your breathing is always happening. You don't have to pay attention to it for that to be the case. But often, whether consciously or unconsciously, we tend to get very involved in our breath. So we maybe start to take shallower breaths, or we start to take bigger breaths, or we tend to breathe quicker, or we maybe tend to hold our breath. What I want you to maybe try your best to do here is just be with your breath. In the same way that you can just listen to the sounds around you. But in particular here, I want you to maybe listen to your exhalations. And as best you can, just try to let your exhales be what they need to be. So oftentimes when you turn your attention to your exhales, you might notice that they get a little bit longer. Or you might notice that they get a little bit more complete. What I'd encourage you to do your best to do is to not grasp for the inhale. That you do your best just to wait for the inhale to naturally occur. We don't want this to feel in any way uncomfortable. We're not trying to hold our breath in any way. But what you might begin to notice is that you maybe don't need to breathe as much as you might think that you do. That when you really relax into it, your breathing is actually able to get quite small, to get quite subtle. I sometimes like to use the metaphor for your breathing is like watering plants. So we obviously need to breathe in the same way the plants need water. But overwatering a plant can actually be just as bad as underwatering a plant. And so what I want you to do, think with your breathing here is not underwatering, but equally we're going to try and not overwater. We want to maybe allow ourselves to breathe in a slightly less effortful, slightly more gentle, maybe even a slightly more subtle way. And so what all these things can potentially do, softening our vision, softening the face, softening the big muscles of the arms, the hands, the legs, the feet. Is it can help us find a little sense of spaciousness. As if we're taking a moment to kind of let everything happen, again, in landscape rather than portrait. And what this spaciousness can potentially do is, again, give us space to listen. But it can also give us space for new connections, new ideas, new insights. And the lovely thing about these practices is that it can be great to practice for an hour. If you have time to do a 90-minute yoga class, or whatever it might be, you can meditate for 2 hours, amazing. But sometimes it can actually be as simple as just taking 5 minutes. Sometimes it can be simple as just like one relaxed breath to help us find that little bit of space. And the other important thing is that this is a practice. So it's not always as simple as just clicking our fingers and switching into this calmer state. There's sometimes things that take a little bit of time. Not always easy at first. But practices that are definitely worth undertaking, in my opinion at least. I was going to give you another few moments here just to tune in to whatever's kind of relevant for you to tune into. When you're ready, I'm going to encourage you to take one more little breathing exercise here. This one probably my favorite. What I want you guys to do is begin to yawn by opening up your mouth and drawing in big, deep breaths. And so even if you don't particularly feel like it, see if you can encourage a few more yawns. And as you yawn, I want you to feel free to let your body move in any way that it wants to move. So with a yawn, you might like reach your arms up and overhead. You might have a little stretch through your fingers. You might have a little stretch through your toes. You might like wiggle around a little bit. There is an amazing breathwork teacher called Dan Brulé, and he calls yawning natural yoga. It's just this meeting of movement and breath. So another yawn or two, just to move in any way that is nice. And then when you feel ready, in whatever way is going to make the most sense to you, you can maybe bring yourself back into a seat, or you can begin to open your eyes or make your way back towards your laptop, computer, phone, whatever it might be. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that practice. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, basically. If you guys have any like questions or thoughts or anything that I can help you with regards to any of those things that we went through, definitely feel free to let me know. But yeah, and genuinely, just to touch on it one more time, for me, a lot of the breathwork world, not all of it, a lot of like yoga and stuff, we can there's a lot of encouragement around like a lot of doing, basically, like big breaths or whatever it might be. But this concept of like relaxing into your breathing, doing your best just to like let your breathing happen, is an incredibly powerful thing, I think. sometimes actually like less is more when it comes to these like restorative practices. So if that did feel useful or nice or interesting, whatever it is, I would definitely recommend next time you are feeling a bit anxious, agitated, stressed, whatever it might be, maybe rather than like reaching for something to do, um, let yourself have that little step back and like do less can be really nice as well.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Brian. Um, so without kind of perhaps jarring anybody out of the state that they've cultivated there, I'm just going to share a link here in the chat because I'd like to return to the question that I asked before we moved through this practice together. And so if possible, if you're able to click on that link that I've shared in the chat, it'll take you to something called Mentimeter. And it's a great way to kind of anonymously share thoughts. Could just be a word, could be a series of words, a phrase, or maybe you write a paragraph, totally up to you. But I would love for us to come back while we're in this state to consider why meditation could be a tool for gender equality, the thing that has brought us here together today. So maybe you throw some things in there. And while perhaps we're thinking about what meditation can do for us as a tool, in this activists and advocates journey towards gender equality, I think Madeline will also be sharing some things there in the chat. We really love to kind of make your presence here count. And we do that quite literally on the 10,000 Students website. And so we'll encourage you to click on the pledge, take the pledge to imagine and take action for gender equality. And when you do that, we'll send you an email and it'll have an action pack in it with loads of different ways for you to kind of easily support a more gender equal world. And in our follow-up email to you from this, we will, of course, include opportunities for you to reconnect with Brian and to connect with the other offerings that we have for you at Stand. We have another event tomorrow evening. Won't be perhaps quite as soothing and relaxing as this evening, but I hope you take this feeling with you to it because it is a discussion about a more gender equal future. And so we've gathered all of these amazing people from around the world. We have the CEO of the Shona Project, who does amazing work here in Ireland. We have the CEO of Girls of Armenia Leadership Soccer, an incredible organization in Armenia that uses sport to empower girls and young women. And we have representatives of the Department of Foreign Affairs here in Ireland, which is pretty exciting. We have some other people joining us as well. So I hope you'll consider taking part in that conversation and maybe learning a bit from the experience of these really inspiring and incredible people. So think about that. We'll just, as we're getting ready to kind of sign off here, I'm going to share my screen so that you can see some of the things that people have shared. There we go. So meditation is a tool for gender equality to combat activist burnout by taking a moment for myself. Absolutely, I love that one. Being an activist is hard work. And there is this pressure, right, to just do it all the time, always, without realizing, like what Brian was saying, that this meditation, breathwork, work is as important as the showy stuff, right? The marches, the protests. In a parasympathetic state, reactions and perhaps decisions are wiser and more skillful. Yes, indeed. This is the place that we want to act from. And how could that not lead to a more gender equal world, right? Connects us with our body. These are great responses. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Perhaps we can all just take a look at each other here. And remove the spotlight. There we are. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us this evening. This was really lovely, and I hope that we see you again soon. So take care of yourselves, work for that gender equal world, and we'll see you soon.